All right, this topic is called converse, inverse, and contrapositive of a conditional statement. You should definitely have your notebook out. This is a topic that you'll learn. It's not super difficult, but it's honestly one of those topics that's easier to learn when you have your notes written down, because you don't use it often enough to usually keep it in your head. So if you have your notes, the next time you either get asked a question on it or get assessed on it, you can go right back to your notes, and there they are, nice and clear. All right, that said, what's a conditional statement? It's something that you've known probably ever since you could speak, pretty much. It's an if-then statement. So if you have if something or other, then something other else. This part here is called the hypothesis, and I can guarantee you've seen that in science. This here is called the conclusion. And when you put them together, you have a conditional statement. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the different ways to manipulate this around. And I want to say that covered in this is also the negation of this statement. Is you would change it around and make it the opposite. So if it's summer, then it's hot. Let's give us then it's hot. So let's say that that's our conditional statement. The negation would be the opposite. If it's not summer, then it's not hot. So write that down in your notes. That's a good example just to have. That's your negation. If our original statement is if it's summer, then it's hot, the negation of the original statement would be if it's not summer, then it's not hot. Alright, let's learn a couple about these. Let's figure out what converse, inverse, and contrapositive is. Let me slide this up. Alright, and so if, I'm going to write it again, if it's summer, then it's hot. Then it's hot. Which isn't necessarily true. Okay, for the converse, this is the part that even if you're like a minimalist note taker, this is what this is the part you want to write. For the converse, if you're given a statement that if P then Q, the converse is going to have you switch it around. So the converse turns it around and says if Q then P. So for our statement if it's summer then it's hot, our converse would be if it's hot then it's summer. My own self, this is the kind of thing I have to keep notes on myself because I don't keep them straight. I don't use them often enough. But this is the P, if P then Q goes to if Q then P. Switch them around. That's how I would write it. The inverse, again, if we're told that the original statement is if P then Q, our inverse is the negation of it. If not P, then not Q. So our sentence would now be if it's not summer, which I've already written down. If it's not summer, then it's not hot. Then it's not hot. So that's officially called the inverse. I think my mnemonic device, it's not super unique or whatever, but for me to remember the difference between the converse and the inverse, in the word inverse, the N is closer to the beginning of the word than in converse. See how the N is the second letter in inverse, and it's the third letter in converse. So I use that. It's if I have to try to remember it myself, and I can't use my notes, I remember that since the N comes sooner, that's the one that's the negation. The converse, the N comes later, so that's not the negation, it's the flipped over one. Hope that kind of makes sense. Alright, let's talk about the contrapositive. The contrapositive is actually the mixture of both of those things. So how would we write it? I guess I should write the original. So our original sentence is if it's summer, then it's hot. Then it's hot. Alright, so for our contrapositive, it's a big word. Okay, so if our original statement was if P then Q, The contrapositive switches them and negates them. So it would be if not Q, then not P. And that little squiggle, I probably should have said it earlier, that means not, or take the opposite of. So if our original statement is if it's summer, then it's hot, our contrapositive of that is if it's not hot, then it's not summer. Cool. So those are the differences between the three of them. This is a form of math called logic. It's not usually covered super in depth in high school, and but you could probably take an entire course of it in college if they offered it. I know I took a summer program once where I took an entire course on logic, and this is just the bare bones, very, very beginnings parts of it. One more thing I want to say is, let's see, there's logic brings it about, well, if the statement is true, does that mean the inverse is true? If a statement is true, does that mean the converse has to be true? And in fact, the thing that you need to know is that if an original statement is true, again, make sure you write this down. The only one that has to be true is the contrapositive. Hey, we're writing a conditional statement about conditional statements. If an original statement is true, then the contrapositive also has to be true. Positive has to be true. You can't necessarily assume that the inverse is true or the converse is true. They might be, but they're not always 100%. Whereas this guy here, contrapositive, is always going to be true if the original statement is true. It just has to happen. And then there's one more thing about conditional statements that we'll cover. It's something that you already know intuitively. And if you've done any proofs or something like that, you would call this the transitive property. But it's saying that if P, then Q, and then if Q means that R happens. So if P happens and that makes Q happen, and then once Q happens, R has to happen, it follows that if P happens, R has to happen. Again, that's kind of, it probably feels like common sense to you, I hope. It makes logical sense. But if both of these guys here are true, then this bottom one has to be true. It just has to happen. It's a chain reaction, you could think of it if you want. So, alright, well that's the basics. I'm not going super in depth in this. I'm not teaching a course on logic, it's just some basics I want you to be able to know. Make sure you have it written down in your notebook. Have it tabbed or something so you can find it again, because you'll need it, but it won't be something that figures prominently in our course. Thank you.